Okay, thank you very much. So, what I plan to do is to make a synthesis of the data we accumulated in the last decades and a half. So, for sure, I won't be able to do that in, I don't know, 20 slides. I try to compress as much as possible in just a small amount of images. But of course, I'll be available for any further questions, discussions. Fortunately, I'm the last one, so nobody has to wait for me here. Okay, so yeah. Well, first, speaking about the Eastern Carpathians and Upper Paleolithic Eastern Carpathians might be a bit misleading because most of these sites in Eastern Carpathians are actually very focused, very concentrated on the Bistrița Valley, and there are, at least this is my personal conviction, there are so many other rivers with similar topographic context that probably provided shelter for the Paleolithic people, but unfortunately, the research was really focused in this area. I will come to that very soon. So anyway, the concentration is really impressive because we have at least 28 find spots. It depends how you count 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. If it's one site or more sites, it doesn't really matter, but the concentration of sites is absolutely impressive, and at least 14 are pluristratified. That means they have at least 2 cultural layers, but usually they go to 5 or 6 different upper Paleolithic cultural layers. Well, in terms of history of research, I will just split it into actually 3 big slices. So there was first a large-scale excavation research project in the 50s on occasioned by the construction of this big dam from Bicaz, this Muntelui Dam. And after that, after the first stage of research, which was really large scale, I'm talking about hundreds of square meters excavated in each site, we had another also in communist times, rather intermittent research stage later on, but again reaching sometimes really large excavated surfaces. In the case of, for instance, one site, Lesbos, has like 850 square meters excavated in several campaigns, which is really a lot, yeah, for our standards. And I would say that the last stage started sometimes in the late 90s, in 1998, when we restarted the excavation in some other sites there, and also some field reassessments, also coupled with finding of new sites, and of course that led to a huge amount of data. So we have rather low resolution data, which was recovered in the first stages of research, and of course we have increasing larger, better amount of higher resolution data from the last decade's research. This is a challenge, to put together data from with various, as you can easily see, various degrees of resolution. But I still think that there is a good potential to see, at least to have a rough image or a diachronic cut through this upper Paleolithic layers, especially in the light of the new data we've just recovered in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years. In terms of topographic settings, these sites on the Bistrița River are redundantly placed on pretty much at the same position. Usually it's almost, you don't need GIS modeling to simply find it. We did it, yeah, anyway, but still it's kind of redundant and relatively easy to identify the site because usually they are located on the middle low terraces. On the altitudes, depending on the local topography, just range between 200 and 600 meters. And generally they are rather close to the river, so there's only one exception, one site which is like 120 meters higher from the actual river level, so they are generally quite close to the river, and usually on gentle slopes, always on the right side of the river. This is also the sunny part, always in the sun, but also is the part which, because of the gentle slopes, also preserved the sediments, yeah, contrary to the other source. So we are not sure that we are dealing with actual model the people selected, or it's just a, let's say, a bias of preservation. It's interesting, and this is, I would think, important. Bistrița provides a good, let's say, natural communication way between the eastern parts of Romania, Moldavia, the eastern steppes, yeah, and the Carpathian Basin. So they are, coming back to what I said before, I think there are so many other contexts because we still have valleys crossing the Eastern Carpathians that provide the same affordances. But they, unfortunately, they were not excavated or not even research field surveyed so far. So we plan to do that in the future. Okay, in terms of paleo environment, Well, the archives on the Bistrița don't have this kind of resolution that we, for instance, find in the case of the Löss records of the Lower Danube. We have a higher accumulation rate on the Lower Danube. We have really a lot of high-resolution research done there. So if I would look for a comparative frame for the Eastern Carpathian site, I would say that, yes, the Lower Danube Löss provides so far the best record, the most complete. Yeah? So these are the main features which are also shared to a great degree by the Bistrița or the Eastern Carpathian site. Basically, we are dealing with Lössic accumulation and colluvial accumulation, and the age estimation of the sequences simply cover the entire last glacial cycle most of the time. And the difference and the most important, let's say, slide that is captured by the sediment sequences on the Eastern Carpathians is, of course, the stage 2, the marine isotope stage 2, yeah, so which corresponds more or less to the last glacial maximum. So when comparing these Löss sequences from this, let's say, it's not typical Löss, it's more Löss derivatives on the Eastern Carpathians. When comparing this to the Lower Danube, we get to observe the same pattern of paleosoil formation and Löss deposition, which is typical for this latitude. The chronostratigraphical ranges I've mentioned already from the last interglacial up to the Holocene. And in terms of pedogenesis and Löss formation, we see the same patterns. The difference are, however, connected to the mountain environments and from the Eastern Carpathians. And you could see that the local archives in relation to proper Löss archives have a stronger periglacial input. You could see various cryogenic features from fissures, polygonal features, solifluction, which is often affecting the cultural layers, ice wedges, and so on. So the regional record is incredibly similar. So it's the sequence, the local sedimentary sequences are perfectly comparable. So that's why from the very beginning, from the 50s, the Romanian researchers preferred to put everything in just one column and try to establish some sort of relative chronology based on the key, or let's say main key sequence. They were basically right, yeah, in the 50s, yeah, so it was not that bad, because in terms of sedimentary sequences, they are indeed very comparable, but there are, however, quite important differences in terms of topography and geomorphologic processes depending on the position of each terraces and the accumulation. The major concentration of Upper Paleolithic occupation is, of course, in this major lithostratigraphic unit, which we call the G2, yeah, which is a fine silt, yeah, and it's regularly overprinted by this a reddish soil, which, according to the OSL estimation, should be younger than 15,000, so probably it's correlated to boiling gallery. And everything below is the host of this Upper Paleolithic concentration. Let me see if I can. Okay. And this is also well proven by the concentration of radiocarbon samples. So the chronology we have at our disposal now. Yes, we got 100 and more radiocarbon samples. So I would say that the vast majority are actually recent AMS estimations, but we also have some old classical radiocarbon done in the 80s. And what you could easily see, if you look at this concentration, the number of radiocarbon dates, the number of cultural layers, and this is a comparison with the actual, let's say, relative chronology. The layers we do not exactly date, but we know the relative chronology. So I would say that the image provided by radiocarbon ages, although they were focused on some layers, on some sites, it's quite relevant for the actual, let's say, intensity of human presence, as far as you could tell. So you could see that you have everything, most of the ages are focused here, and especially at the peak of the late glacial maximum. So this is the current image we have. Of course, apart from the radiocarbon, we also have quite a good number of OSL samples, and also some thermoluminescence samples done on burnt flint, but basically they go into the same direction. Another very interesting aspect and highly helpful for us was the lithic raw material sources. We've done a lot of petrographic thin blades, geochemical analysis and so on, and we are able to notice that there's a huge diversity of lithic raw materials that were used on the Eastern Carpathian side. So we have basically two major categories. We have the Eastern Carpathians originating sources that are local or regional, usually in the range of less than 50, 80 kilometers around the sites, and we have distant exotic flint, usually Cretaceous flint, and with to some degrees with just small amounts of obsidian, yeah, from Slovakia. But we know that this high distance flint is coming from the Prut-Dniester area, so we have a distance of at least 120, 150 kilometers as the crow flies, and most importantly, we do have Balkan flint, which was quite a surprise for us because we also found it in Swiderian context and so on, which comes from at least 400 kilometers as the crow flies, and this is really somehow unexpected range, and I will explain you why it's so unexpected. Anyway, in terms of cultural taxonomy, it was very disputed. I don't want to get into this old history of research. So basically we have what we always have in archaeology, lumpers and splitters, people who prefer to call everything as, let's say, Gravettian, and people who define a lot of Gravettian phases, usually based on a single radiocarbon. I am personally more of a more of a lumper, so I would just propose a very simple taxonomy that's easier to follow and roughly corresponds to all the data we have presently. So I will start with the early Upper Paleolithic, or first human presence on the Eastern Carpathians. We do have hints that people were present there by, let's say, Aurignacian time, but we found no actual stratified context. We have several sites that provided radiocarbon, isolated charcoal, or a bunch of lithics undiagnostic. So we are not sure when this all started. We also have these big burn features that are often recorded and even dated in many sequences, but they provided not a single flake. So we discussed yesterday a bit about these burn features, but time is short, so I wouldn't get much into it. We don't know if it's a natural fire or completely eroded cultural layers. Yeah. So, but we know that from OSL and from field observation that we are dealing with massive erosions in the lower part of the sequences. So most OSL ages are younger than 30,000. So it's really, you need to be very lucky to find a sequence that preserves older cultural layers. Yeah, this is a matter of preservation. The Gravettian is already present on the Bistrița by around 31,000 BP. Only one site for Ciornei provided, let's say, a decent collection that is easy to analyze, and it's a consistent proof, but we also have several other sites on the area that provided comparable ages, but really small undiagnostic collections. So I wouldn't insist on this one, just to notice this big highly exotic Mediterranean shells, red shells brought from the Mediterranean Sea. I don't know how and when, and I wouldn't again discuss, I don't have the time to discuss this, but we may do it after that. Then we have the Late Gravettian, which is a bit better represented. There are at least two sites, except for this small collection in Vereș, which is not necessarily very relevant and it's really small. We have at least two sites that provided good context. One is Buda and the other one is Bistrița 3, yeah, which provided a very nice Late Gravettian context with massive autumn bison and reindeer hunting, and of course a lot of flints. This is something truly exceptional. I also mentioned that in Buda we have about 50% Cretaceous flint exotically, and in Bistrița we have 95% it's Turonian flints brought from the Dniester Valley. Yeah. So just okay, move further. The most dense human presence is the early Epigravettian, which is present virtually in all sites, and we have sometimes really rich collections, lithic collections. It's very distinct from the Gravettian before because we have important technological changes, we have important raw material changes, so with a great focus on local and regional raw materials. And also we have a very rich and diverse organic industry in some sites when preserved, in contrast to the previous Gravettian. The proper Epigravettian, well, we didn't have any radiocarbon age younger than 20,000 by 2007. Then we found this shore site, the Bistrița shore site, which provided, and we're still excavating this site last year and this year, which provided a really rich and diverse lithic industry, and incredibly rich in end scrapers. It looks like a functionally focused site. It's very rich, and we do have now about 10 radiocarbon ages, really fixing the chronology to 16,000. Also, to conclude the diachronic cut, in the uppermost part of all these sequences, we have this dusty powderish propolis, which probably should be connected to the younger Dryas, and which provided sometimes really big lithic collections, but in no actual structure or anything like that. So it was formally interpreted as epigravettian, but so the chronology and the finds we also made in some sites like Bistricara indicates, Bistricara 3 for instance, indicate that this might be a late Paleolithic, like tang technocomplexes, because we do have hints for this kind of tang implements and shouldered implements that suggest a bit younger chronology. We failed in finding any kind of datable material so far, but it's most likely that we're dealing with this late Gravettian. We don't know how this we don't know how this connects actually to the Swedekian, which was found and excavated in only one site at high altitude, about 1,400 meters in altitude of Ciornei mountain, and this one provided a very typical, let's say, Swiderian industry, going between 13 and 10.5, a huge diversity of raw materials, and again, much like the epigravettian before, it provided this surprisingly Balkan flint, yeah, higher up in the upper Carpathians. Okay, so I also have some idea of some, let's say, observations regarding the habitat features. They are generally pointing to high mobility and really the small shelters. We didn't have any sort of hints suggesting long-term occupations, but from what we can see, yeah, we have always some sort of habitat structures, so probably some light shelters, not very big. In terms of seasonality, for the few sites where that provided fauna, we only have winter and autumn and winter occupation. Yeah, I'm not sure this is true because most of the sites, they didn't preserve fauna, but when we do have fauna, you have this kind of biotope, yeah, usually dominated by reindeer, bison, horse, fox, and some hares too. Organic industry, only the early epigravettian provided a rich organic industry. We have smoothers, ivory points, and so on. Yeah, even a small bone point, yeah, bone needle, sorry. Yeah. But it's surprising that you only have it in the early epigravettian and not in the gravettian that has faunal preservation. Summing up, so I'm getting closer. Yeah. The area provided what one would call a full upper Paleolithic sequence, probably starting with some early upper Paleolithic, continuing with Gravettian, epigravettian, and even some late Paleolithic. Generally speaking, if in terms of sedimentary preservation and context, we are dealing with occupations during a cold, dry environment, so we simply have no occupations that correspond to soil formation episodes or anything like that. Yeah, it's definitely in full synchronicity to what we have to the east, especially to the Prut-Dniester area. From the Gravettian, epigravettian, and so on, we have this full synchronicity. It's very interesting to see this. It acts like a hub for raw materials coming from very different areas. And we have a huge research potential, yeah, for the future because, as I said, we have this GIS modeling, and we already found in the area of high possibility, yeah, highly likely concentration. We already find two sites that prove that the model works. And just to conclude, why people were there? This is a big issue. Yeah, we're just kept on thinking on that for decades now, and I would say that this high concentration of sites it's probably connected to research focus first. Yeah, it's obviously that a lot of work has been done in this area, yeah, for the last half a century. So of course, this is why it's so focused. Also, the preservation and visibility of sites is also very important because the sequences on the Bistrița are like usually 3 meters, 4 meters deep. They are not particularly deep, so it's rather easy to get into Paleolithic layers. Sometimes they are right on the surface or close to the surface. Also, most sites are located, where modern villages are located, so it's rather easy. Again, there are greater chances to find them, especially because there are also low exploitation there. If you look at the, let's say, Löss deposition, Aeolian deposition to the east and south, that's really, really impressive. So it's very difficult to find sites if they are buried 8 to 10 meters below. So in the case of Visita, this is also favorable. It's easy to locate the site. But at the same time, I also think that deconcentration, it's somehow connected to the local resources and the advantages provided by this mountain environment. This could be fuel, shelter, some seasonal resources. We don't have a clear model, but again, it seems to me that they were rather moving from east to west, north and south and so on, so there's not a single pattern of movement if you just trace the local raw materials. So, that was it. Thank you very much for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'm sure they are, but I have to go very fast. Yes.
If I understand well, there is no signal for middle equation.
Nope. Nope. It's possible, but the problem is that we do not have good preservation of sediment. So the OSL chronology indicates that from 30,000 we dropped down to 47 suddenly, and then to 76 and so on. So we have breaks in sedimentation in the lowermost part of the deposit. So even the early stages of the Upper Paleolithic are missing in most, probably you are familiar with the Orignation on the Bistrița Valley and all this stuff that were published in the 80s, 90s. It was obviously, both chronologically and in terms of lithic, it was wrong in assignation. There's no origination because the chronology, the oldest available chronology by the 90s was like 25,000 calibrated. That was, and they proposed this kind of origination, very late origination. It's definitely not the case. And most of the layers are actually early epigravettian, which were considered Gravetian origination before. So the misinterpretation was really, really bad. But it's just a matter of preservation. I'm sure there are contexts, like in Poiana Cireșului, where they have like 8 meters of deposit, and there, deep enough at 6 meters or so, they did find small collections of lithics and charcoals indicated origination time chronology. So there is something below. In some context, there is something. But you need to be lucky enough to find, the right sediment trap. This is all about. This is not a matter of actual human presence. It's just a matter of preservation.
From the other side, those Swiderian sites, other typical Swiderian points with the flat on the vertical sides and so on, or?
The Swiderian provided a rich lithic industry. I haven't mentioned that, but they excavated in the 50s 400 square meters there, and they provided a 14,000 lithic collection. 14,000, we excavated a smaller trench there, and we got like 3,000, out of 4 square meters. So the density of the lithic collection is really impressive. The chronology indicates that we have at least 3 different occupations, but the entire sequence is 40 centimeters. Yes, we're really on top of the mountains on the Flysch. And they are typical Swiderian arrow points. So we have small Swiderian points, but we also have some larger Swiderian points. Ciornei, the one I presented, is just the only stratified site that provided this data, but there are at least 3 other sites which provided surface collections in pretty much the same position, hinting to the same Swiderian typology, and also at high altitude. So if you ask me, of course, they cannot be there isolated. There are probably many Swiderian spots. Probably some of the spots we've just mentioned here in the younger Dryas powdery schluss could be connected to this cultural phenomena, but we need to take all over again the old collections. Because not our own collection in this layer goes to, I don't know, about 3,000 lithics, and we did find some tanked implements and a huge diversity of raw material, indicating that probably our, let's say, intuition is probably right, but it has to be checked, substantiated. But they are typical Swiderian arrow points. I failed in showing that we also found some interesting sandstone shaft straighteners. Yeah, you know, this, have you ever mentioned, by the way, I just wanted to ask, for the Swiderians, you know, the shaft straighteners, just some curved sandstone stuff. I just didn't have a proper picture for that, yes, so, but this is also interesting. But the problem is, again, with the depth of the stratigraphy, it's really at 40 centimeters, it's a nightmare to see the, let's say, diachronic breadth. There are several layers, but they are completely messed up, yeah, so it's challenging. We try now to work on raw material units and see if it is possible to refit anything, yeah, but it's a work in progress. It's not done yet. Thank you.